Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Spiritual Spotlight series. Today, I am joined by Dr. Dawson Church. He is an award-winning science writer with 3 best-selling books to his credit. He is also a scientist, visionary, and scholar. Thank you so much for coming on the Spiritual Spotlight series. I'm so happy you're here.
Rachel, great to be here.
So, Dr. Church, what initially inspired you to delve into the field of science, of spirituality, and consciousness?
One of the really cool things that science lets us do is measure things. I mean, think about, a million years ago when somebody invented the yardstick and you can actually measure how long a piece of wood was, or a piece of string, or a piece of cloth, or a piece of rope. And we had weights and measures. And so what has happened over the last century or so is we've developed remarkable measuring devices. And so people have been having transformational experiences and been I like to one of my uh like reveries one day. I thought, who was the first person to ever have an experience of untangling themselves from their immediate reality and then feeling a sense of connection with the all that is. And we know that monks and nuns do this, and we know that all of us have glimpses of the divine and that realm far
Mhm.
beyond our local reality. But I thought of this maybe, 4 million years ago. There was a woman who, after she'd got her kids fed, was sitting around the campfire staring up at the stars and felt herself, as she looked at the stars, being drawn into this space far beyond her local reality and having that first transcendent experience. And so we've been doing this now for a long time. We have all kinds of spiritual schools that show us how to do it and give us instructions for it. But now, in the last century, and only in the last century, do we have yardsticks that actually measure transcendence. And so I can literally hook people up to an EEG, and I don't need to know how old they are. I don't even know what gender they are, where they're from, what language they speak. I can read their brain waves like a book, and I can tell exactly if they're, for example, somebody who's anxious, that they're going to have a lot of beta waves
Right.
that are cycling. Their brains going to be cycling between like 18 and 40 cycles per second, big in the beta band. And then if somebody's having a transformational experience, going to have a lot of very slow delta waves, a lot of very, very, very fast gamma waves, and very few of those waves of anxiety. So that's what I love about science, why I'm so drawn to science, is it's allowing us to quantify what were before very mysterious, mystical experiences. And we can now tell they're having these dramatic effects on our bodies, and also dramatic effects, massive effects on our health and longevity. So that's why I'm just so inspired by this field.
I think that's a beautiful answer. And I really love the fact that you have the question of who was the original person that looked up in the sky and says, how are we all connected? So with your work, it is, I'm sorry, my brain just went, you could tell us, whoa.
Good.
You guys, if you were to hook me up to the EEG machine, you would see I'm having a transformational experience. So with your, and I'm also a registered nurse, so I love the fact that you quantify kind of spirituality into reality. So with your extensive research into neuroscience, what has been the most surprising or impactful discovery you've made on the human brain?
What has been really surprising and impactful is the discovery of how quickly our brains can change.
Mm.
And we've known about neuroplasticity since a scientist called Marion Diamond did research in the 1950s, and was the first person to document neuroplasticity in mammals. She was using rats as her test subjects, and actually, her first papers about neuroplasticity in rats didn't get published in a peer-reviewed journal because they said, she's just a woman. What does this woman know about science? She's just a graduate student. And it wasn't until a man did a replication of that and got published that they published her stuff later on. But if she became one of the towering figures in, I just couldn't resist getting my little feminist dig in there. But
Thank you. Thank you.
science has all of its own peculiarities and weirdnesses as well. But no, she did. So she demonstrated neuroplasticity, and we now have it's become part of our popular culture to know you can rewire your brain. What people don't understand yet, and what even neuroscientists don't understand yet, is how quickly we do it. In my book, Mind to Matter, I give a case history of a TV announcer, a guy called Graham Phillips, who has a big show called Catalyst in Australia. He heard about mindfulness meditation, and he took his whole TV crew into an advanced neuroscience lab before he began a mindfulness course. And they measured the volume of every area of his brain down to the last neuron. They gave him a whole bunch of cognitive and behavioral tests. And then he started learning mindfulness. And he found he was getting calmer after just a week or two. His behavior was changing. He was much less aggressive, much less triggered. When he went back to the lab and they measured his brain again after 2 months of practicing mindfulness and meditation every day in a focused way, they found that the emotion regulation core of his brain, the part of the brain that mediates emotion regulation. In other words, when you're angry, when you're upset, when you're overwhelmed, when you're impatient, it just dials that down. And
Mm.
that little piece of tissue is called the dentate gyrus. It's part of the hippocampus, part of the emotional brain. His dentate gyrus in 8 weeks had grown measurably, and the volume of his dentate gyrus had grown by 22.8%. Now think about that, 22.8%, that's growing by about a quarter bigger, more bulk in the emotion regulation circuit in his brain in only 8 weeks. And this is what is so incredibly exciting. And so that's the big new exciting discovery in neuroscience is that it doesn't take 10,000 hours. You don't have to go into a monastery. You don't have to take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. You don't have to give up your glass of wine or whatever else turns you on. You can just go do all those things and you meditate, and your brain's changing in 8 weeks. An explosion of growth of tissue in centers like emotion regulation. And we find that, for example, in long-term meditators, and these are people who've done it now that have done the 10,000 hours and done 10,000 hours more, their amygdala, their fire alarm that sends fight or flight signals down into the body, it shrivels up. It atrophies because they aren't using it. They are so calm. They have a level of happiness, and the level of happiness they have is off the charts. It's like people don't even know it's possible to get this happy, but that's what neuroscience shows us. So as we're measuring these changes, we're discovering massive shifts in the structure and function of the brain, and they're happening really, really quickly when you start an evidence-based effective meditation program.
That is amazing. And in your answer, you just brought up one of your books, Mind to Matter. It explores the brain creates much of our perceived reality. How does this concept empower individuals in their daily lives?
Well, we tend to think that we feel a certain way because of things happening outside of us. And what our newest neuroscientific discoveries are showing is that the brain, like the old model was that consciousness was an artifact of a highly evolved brain. So we know that, dogs and cats have consciousness. Look into their eyes and you can feel the being there. You look at the eye of a lizard or a snake, you don't feel quite the same degree of look at the eye, simple eye of an insect, and you don't see that consciousness there. So the idea was that the consciousness was an artifact of these evolved brains that we've got. But what the newest research shows is that that model is really, really not based in empirical research. What our
Hmm.
brains are much more like is a radio receiver or a TV receiver or a device. And so our brains are downloading information from a reality field, and then they are projecting that into the outside world as what we perceive as objective reality. And so we think that your reality is the same as my reality. And often our reality is actually quite different based on the projections of our brains. And so you'll have somebody, for example, in a really difficult situation, and they'll feel as though they're stuck, as though they're in a place where they can't escape. They'll feel as though they're really deprived. They'll feel unlucky as a result of some disaster in their lives. Another person will have a disaster in their life and they will thrive. One of the in Bliss Brain, I talk about this a lot. I've had a whole chapter on this called post-traumatic growth. And people have lemonade in their lives. We all get lemonade, well, lemons in our lives. Do we make lemonade out of it or not? And the people who experience post-traumatic growth are those who say, you know, I've had a shattering event. I've been in combat. I've been through a horrible divorce. I've had this terrible diagnosis. I've had a financial crash, and they have all the same disasters. And what those people do is they thrive in post-traumatic growth. So it's not your circumstances that create your reality. You create your reality and you project it out by your worldview, by your thoughts, by your beliefs. And so people will have the same experiences living in the same world, and they are having radically different experiences based on the use they're making of their brains. So there's stuff happening out there, how we filter it, how we process it through our nervous system, the degree of resilience circuitry we build in our brains has a dramatic effect on how we see the world and how we act. So our brains, again, are functioning like receivers of this information, and then we project that out into everyday reality. And one example I use in my books, which is really interesting, because it has to do with the water molecule. And the water molecule is a really well understood molecule, has been for hundreds of years. We know it has two little hydrogen atoms, one big oxygen atom, H2O. And we've been able to measure the angle at which those two hydrogens bond to the oxygen atom for a century now. It's 104 degrees. It's always 104 degrees, regardless of where the water is in gaseous form or solid or liquid form. That's the bonding angle of water. It's always 104 degrees, except when it isn't. And when it isn't is when a healer takes a glass of water, and a healing touch practitioner or a person trained in energy healing takes that water and they bless it. They hold their hands over it. They project healing intentions into the water. And when that happens, the bonding angle of the water shrinks, it changes. So here we are literally changing molecules in the environment around us with our minds, with our thoughts, with our beliefs, with our energy. I mean, we are powerful creators. And so we're creating cortisol, we're creating adrenaline if we're stressed. We're creating DHEA, we're creating serotonin and dopamine when we are relaxed. So there are all these like literally millions of molecules are being created in our bodies based on our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, our spiritual experiences, our transcendent experiences. And so that's what that book shows, is that the brain has this amazing ability to create molecules, to shift the world around us. And we want to use that consciously, because people are just letting their minds wander all over the place, be influenced by the news and social media and all kinds of just rubbish from the outside world. And, you know, the old saying in computer science is garbage in, garbage out. So they're producing a world around them that isn't very pleasant because they're letting their thoughts be influenced by all this horrible stuff. I happened to be bicycling yesterday past a neighbor's house, and he was getting out of his car, and he opened the door. He had the door open for a while, and I chatted with him for a few minutes, but the radio was on. And I just heard the station he was listening to, and it's full of conspiracy theories and negative beliefs and accusations and defensiveness and denial. And I thought, you poor man, you've trapped yourself in a car and you're feeding all this garbage into your consciousness.
Right.
What's your life going to look like after that? So we have that responsibility to take charge of our lives, choose what we bring into our lives. We need to pull in useful information and inspiring experiences like the Spiritual Spotlight series.
Thank you. Thank you
Like
so
we're doing
much.
right here. And
I
that's
mean,
then the world we produce outside of ourselves.
really, you've brought up so many valuable points, but the one thing I do want to talk about, and this is something that you do, your research has been published in numerous prestigious journals. Which study or paper do you feel has been most pivotal in advancing the understanding of EFT, which is emotional freedom techniques?
Yeah, so EFT, or emotional freedom techniques, uses energy in the form of acupressure. Not acupuncture with the needles, acupressure using your fingertips to tap on your skin, on your body, and that pressure produces tiny electrical charges that travel through your body. And initially, we did very simple EFT research. We've done some really elaborate research over the last few years with MRIs and EEGs and gene chips and hormone assays. And so I think that our early studies were ridiculed by skeptics. And they said, oh, well, it's just, self-report. People are self-reporting, anxiety, depression, phobias, PTSD. And I don't ridicule self-report. I really respect self-report. When a veteran who's been suffering from nightmares and insomnia, for 40 years since Vietnam, when he comes in for a second session and says, this is one of the actual stories in one of my books, he said on his second session to his therapist, he said, after the first session I did with you and did EFT with you, I slept all the way through the night for the first time since Vietnam. First
That
time in
is
40 years.
amazing.
That powerful. So the skeptics would ridicule, oh, it's just, self-report, people just fitting in these forums and you're measuring anxiety, depression. But, when you see people's anxiety go away and their depression go away and their phobias go away and their hypervigilance go away and they're getting their lives back, it's powerful. That was all the early research. Now we're doing research using these more elaborate tools that are giving us objective measures as well as the subjective measures.
Right.
I'm not just telling you I'm feeling better. Now, as a researcher, I can read your cortisol. And one study we did looked at people doing this meditation method called eco meditation and doing EFT for a week. They did it intensively in a retreat center for a week, clearing trauma with EFT,
Right.
elevated states with meditation. After 1 week, Rachel, their baseline cortisol levels had dropped by 37%. So it's not just that they are feeling better subjectively, their cortisol is dramatically lower. And so those are the exciting new studies we're doing now, is we're showing that things like immunoglobulins, immune system responses are rising, uh, stress hormones like cortisol, neurotransmitters like adrenaline are dropping, and things like heart rate variability, again, an objective measure, is improving, and a whole host of good things are happening. So I think the most impactful studies for me are the fact that these interior, these subjective changes are supported by objective measures like heart rate, like blood pressure, like gene expression, like brain waves, like neural signaling. And all of these things are reinforcing the fact that when you feel good, when you feel better, when you drop your stress, you feel much better internally. And then objectively, all these markers of your well-being rise. So those are the more recent and more impactful studies.
That is amazing. So, what do you feel are the most common misconceptions you encounter about EFT, and how do you address them?
The most common misconceptions about EFT, I think there's several of them. One is that it's just too simple. I mean, how can tapping on
So
a
true.
dozen pressure points literally shift a memory in a few seconds? And like one veteran I worked for was really triggered whenever he'd hear the sound of a water bottle. If someone took a water bottle and did this,
That is
cracked the bottle,
interesting.
he'd be ready to dive under the table because it sounded to him, it reminded him, it triggered him with the sound of a small arms fire in Iraq where he'd served. And so I tapped with him, and it's like miraculous. After just one tapping session, he could hear that same sound, and he was at a zero in terms of emotional triggering. So how can something as simple as this be so quick and so effective? But it is, because it's physiological. It's just giving your body a soothing signal. You're having this non-soothing signal to go to fight or flight come from a memory, like that firefight in the Battle of Fallujah. And now you're getting this calming signal of tapping on acupressure points. So that's one misconception. Is how can something so simple calm you down so quickly? And so you want to just try it for yourself. That's why I say go on my website, download the free EFT mini manual, and just give it a try. And you'll find that in a few moments, you're likely to have your numbers in terms of your quantity of emotional triggering around those events drop dramatically. So how can it be so simple and work so fast? So that's one thing. Another misconception, I think, though, that leads to is people use EFT on all kinds of things. They use it for insomnia, anxiety, depression. They use it for sports performance, social anxiety, performance anxiety, like giving a speech or giving a presentation, and their lives get a lot better. But I think that some people then think, oh, well, all I need to do is do energy work like EFT, and it'll fix everything. It doesn't fix everything. You need to have great nutrition. You need to have clean water. You need to be having an appropriate amount of sleep. And you need to be having high quality sleep. You need to have great relationships. You need to have lots of touch in your life. You know, if you're in a relationship, like my wife and I, people are just completely amazed when they see us after, decades of marriage. And every day we're hugging and we're kissing and we're holding each other and we're saying nice things to each other. And people are like, I don't get it. How can this be after so many years? Aren't you bored? And touch is so nourishing. So with our children, we hold our children, our grandchildren, we hug them, we touch them. Have lots of this in your life. So one misconception is I get my energy work right, and it's going to take care of everything in my life, and it's going to improve everything in your life for sure. But still, support yourself with everything, all those other ways of healing and having a quality life. And I'm just going to say it, put in a big plug here too for modern medicine. You're going to find you do the energy work and you may still need a prescription and you may still need surgery and you may still need to visit your doctor. So, these things are not a substitute. These things are all part of our self-care system. Allopathic medicine is there for you. If I had a serious bacterial infection, I would certainly tap, but I would make an appointment with my doctor immediately as well. So you can't use this as a substitute for things. Now, bear in mind that allopathic medicine, Andrew Weil has a really good way of figuring out what you primarily want to go to allopathic medicine for. And it's things like physical trauma, breaking a limb, serious infection. Allopathic medicine is great with that kind of stuff. For lifestyle diseases, for autoimmune diseases, not so much. That's where you need alternative medicine, you need energy medicine, and they can fix things that conventional medicine can't. Like, for example, fibromyalgia. I have a fibromyalgia course called FibroClear, and we've done several studies of fibromyalgia, EFT tapping for fibromyalgia, and the clinical trials show that roughly two-thirds of people improve from fibromyalgia, and one-third of people completely heal from fibromyalgia just releasing all the trapped emotions in their bodies. So that's what energy medicine can do for fibromyalgia. If you go on the Mayo Clinic website and look up fibromyalgia, the very first line on the website under the fibromyalgia entry is fibromyalgia is an incurable disease. Sure. For conventional medicine, absolutely. For energy medicine, the research shows that in two-thirds of cases, it gets better. One-third of cases result in people getting completely better from chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and those allied complaints. So for all of those kinds of conditions, autoimmune conditions, lifestyle conditions, low energy, I mean, we're meant to have tons of energy. Our bodies produce enormous amounts of energy every day. And I see what shocks me sometimes, Rachel, is people when I'm doing an in-person workshop, like most of my workshops are virtual, like on Zoom. Sometimes I'm at Omega or I'm at Esalen or someplace where I'm with people one-on-one. And I'll meet people who are 22 years old or 35 years old, and they say, I have no energy. I'm thinking, if you were 102, okay, I believe energy might be a problem for you, but energy shouldn't be a problem for you at 22. And what's going on there? So low energy, people who have low physical energy, what's going on? It could be something organic, but it often is to do with your energy field and the energy and the potential you're allowing to flow through you. So you want to use appropriate remedies. And again, all of these things, homeopathy, acupuncture, Ayurveda, conventional medicine, energy medicine, all of these have their place.
I really appreciate you bringing all of that up because I'm a registered nurse who, in my day world, I actually manage a doctor's office, but I'm also an energy healer. So I do feel that there's a time and place for all of these complementary medicines that can really help you to have the most amazing life. So I just think that's beautiful. So shifting focus to your book, Bliss Brain, can you maybe explain the concept of the 7 neurochemicals of ecstasy and their role in achieving blissful states?
I got really interested in those blissful states because the Eastern scriptures, and there are some amazing texts like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. There is the Crest Jewel of Illumination by Shankara. There's the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads. They describe these ecstatic states. Now, there's a word they use for joy, being happy. Vishoka is a Sanskrit word. It means sorrowless joy. Wouldn't we all love sorrowless joy? There's another word they use called ananda, and that is far beyond sorrowless joy. That is absolute blissful ecstasy. And so I began experiencing that in meditation at a certain point. I would sit there and I would just go, I would become so incredibly saturated with bliss. Sometimes I would just cry. I didn't know what to do with all the love and the joy and the compassion and the wonder, oh, I felt in meditations. And then on October 9th, 2017, that night, my wife shook me awake and said, Dawson, something's really wrong. I looked out the window, ran outside. There was a wildfire sweeping down the adjoining hill toward our home. And I just yelled at her, we're getting out of here right now. And we literally threw on our clothes, grabbed our phones, sprinted for our car, and drove out through a hellscape of trees bursting on fire and winds gusting up to 80 miles an hour. The fire was traveling at it was consuming going like a football field length every 3 seconds. This is a really fast moving fire. And we got out just before the fire consumed our office, our our home, and it burned 5,400 homes. I mean, this is just a devastating fire, just ripped through the northern part of California. Many people died. I mean, 5,000 families suddenly were homeless. It was just a horrendous experience for everyone concerned, including us. And we, in the first chapter of Bliss Brain, I tell the whole story. I won't tell it now, but a lot of other very difficult things happened for us in the year after the fire. We lost all our possessions. We also lost all our money. We lost all our retirement savings, and I lost my health. I wasn't doing very well physically. Needed a couple of operations. So pretty much the year after the fire was about as bad as you can imagine on many different fronts. And I was meditating every single day. I never skipped a day of meditation. And I realized a few months after the fire, as I was sitting in this place, I was about $300,000 in debt at that time. Again, lost all my retirement savings, sick. And I realized every day I sat there in meditation, I felt prosperous, I felt healthy, I felt abundant, I felt optimistic, unshakably optimistic. And I thought, and people would look at me and say, Dawson, what's going on with you? I mean, how can this be? And so I read up on the molecule anandamide. And it's called anandamide, it's called the bliss molecule, because when we have it in our brains and we generate lots of it when we meditate, it makes us super happy. That's why we find these meditators are at these elevated emotional states. And so I wrote the book Bliss Brain around this phenomenon. You can go from Vishoka, sorrowless joy, which is pretty nice. I mean, a lot of people don't even get there, to Ananda, where you are absolutely stoned out of your mind on bliss. I mean, you walk around, we have to, each one of my eco meditation tracks, and there are lots of them free online. You can just go anywhere and grab an eco meditation track to listen to. They will end, though, with a grounding exercise because people get so far out there into the cosmos. We have to, like a helium balloon, bring them back down and make sure their feet are on the ground before they drive a car or try and change the kid's diaper. So they all end with grounding. But believe me, Ananda bliss is accessible to you. And in Bliss Brain, I wanted to explain to people how you can lose everything and you can still be in ecstasy because you are in touch with the source. You're up there in non-local mind. You're up there with the conscious universe. And in consciousness, everything is there. And one of the most beautiful images in chapter one of Bliss Brain is an image of a Buddha statue. And it was taken the day after the fire by a friend of mine who snuck in past the National Guard and took photographs of the house to show us what it looked like. And there was a concrete slab, everything was just ash, everything had burned. But when the office burned down, it turned out there had been this Buddha statue that had been stuck in the back of a closet many years before. We'd piled papers in front of it, forgotten it was there, until the whole office burned and was ash. And so you see this ash on this concrete slab, and in the center, the Buddha sits there, completely serene. And I write in the book when I had the photograph of the Buddha there, I say, everything burned, but compassion doesn't burn. And love doesn't burn. Beauty doesn't burn. Awe doesn't burn. Kindness. You can't burn kindness.
And
Can't burn Ananda. So you can't keep all of that stuff if you have it in your own brain. And so that's the big message of the book, is that you can lose everything and lose nothing, because you have what really counts when you have resilience, creativity, joy, and all the just the enormous amounts of love you find when you're connected with that transcendent state.
I think that is so beautiful. And one of the things you talk about in the book is deepening practices. So how can deepening practices can be incorporated into daily life?
Yeah, so you have to, what I aim to do in all my books is not just tell stories, outline the science, and inspire people. I need people to apply what they learn. And so there are practices, and that might mean a breathing technique you use, a journaling. A lot of them are journaling exercises, becoming mindful. How do we live our lives consciously? How do we wake up and live an awake life every day? Like right now, you're listening and you're alert. Presumably, you're already awake. How do you stop yourself from drifting back into being asleep and being unconscious and being like that neighbor of mine who's trapping himself in this little sound box of a car with all of these negative messages skittering around his head, going into his ears, and then he's filling his consciousness with that. What do you fill your consciousness with? And so those deepening practices are to encourage you to wake up in every day. One simple one, which I teach as part of we have an advanced course, a 1 year course in awakening called the Short Path to Oneness, which is really it's like our flagship course. You get a mentor, you get a therapist, you're in it for a year. It's a course for people who really want to explore the world's great spiritual traditions and apply those things in their lives. And one of their deepening practices drawn from that is just for a couple of weeks, every few minutes or every hour or two, just imagine yourself looking at your life from the witness perspective and saying to yourself, I'm looking at myself from above. I'm looking down on this life from the witness perspective. And you just do that regularly a few times throughout every day. And that starts to produce a very interesting shift in cognition, because now you're seeing your life with a sense of objectivity. And I won't go into the really long-term research project that this comes from, but a lot of research shows that the ability to see yourself in neuroscience, that part of the brain is called perspective taking. You're seeing yourself with perspective. You aren't enmeshed in your local reality. You aren't caught up in the drama of everyday life anymore. You're looking down on it. And that sense of perspective is regarded in some research as the single most important shift in consciousness you can make, to see yourself as the witness. So it's a deepening practice. It's a very simple one. Just do that a few dozen times a week. And again, you're disentangling yourself from enmeshment in your everyday reality. And you're opening yourself up to extraordinary reality and the extraordinary love, wisdom, joy, and sense of who you are that is eternal, that is consciousness. We are consciousness. We descend into a human body for a lifespan, 83 years or however long we live, and then our body wears out, we drop it, and we're pure consciousness again. But you want to become pure consciousness a few times while you're in the body. And the great masters are able to maintain continuous consciousness of being consciousness itself all the time when they're in the body. So if read about Jesus or Ramana Maharshi or the Buddha, these great teachers are able to stay in those states continuously. For most of us, we're not at that point. We have to move ourselves consciously there in meditation. But if you do these deepening practices regularly, like seeing yourself as the witness, after a while, we're measuring in one study that that ananda, that bliss, starts to extend from within you to outside of you. And Patanjali's Yoga Sutras talk about this, advanced yogis. You walk into their presence, you're a few feet away from them, and you can feel the Ananda. If you've ever received Shaktipat from an enlightened master, you'll know you walk up to an enlightened master and she touches you on the forehead, and suddenly, I mean, people just have radically life-changing experiences. You're in the field, and her field is extending a long way away from her body. So you want to do these deepening practices and open yourself to these kinds of miraculous shifts. If you do incorporate them in your everyday life, after a while, you aren't just feeling good inside. You're feeling good, so good that literally people 10, 20, 50, 100, 500 feet away from you, these effects are non-local. You're literally radiating well-being, compassion out there into the earth's field. And there are people who are radiating violence and anger and confusion, and they're projecting all kinds of other stuff into the psychosphere of the earth. So how about not joining them? How about being one of those people who's hooking in with the all that is, and then you just become a radiant being. Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras talks about being a radiant being and being in the company of other radiant beings. Now we have millions, I mean, and there are millions of people of goodwill radiating out all these positive qualities into the psychosphere of the earth, and it's making a difference. The planet is different as a result of you becoming a radiant being. So those deepening practices are going to guide you to being that radiant being.
I think that is so beautiful. I definitely want to be part of the radiant beings. Like, that is amazing. So with your research, it shows meditation boosts neurotransmitters that are similar to THC. How can understanding this help approaching meditation and mental health? I'm having a moment with radiant beings. Okay. Again, you've knocked me off my course, and I'm just sitting here in bliss. I'm like, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we're inviting everyone to join us in being in that blissful state. Why not?
I
Be
love
ready to
it.
meet. Yeah, so how are you asking how this helps with mental health?
Yes. How can it help with mental health?
Well, psychedelic assisted therapy is really popular right now. People are using psilocybin,
Mhm.
ayahuasca, ecstasy, other kinds of drugs. And the reason that they're so helpful is that they, for a little while, maybe an hour, maybe 10 hours, they shut down the self-referential part of the brain. They shut down the parts of the brain that are constructing our same old conditioned story. And that keeps us suffering. And we think the same ways, we create the same conditioned thoughts, the same conditioned reality every day. And so if you add THC, or if you add psilocybin, or if you add something to the brain, there are ways of shutting down that self-referential part of the brain, and then the person has a chance to experience those elevated states. But when you meditate, you do the same thing. You're generating all these same molecules. You're generating THC, and anandamide, the bliss molecule you generate in meditation in your brain, has the same chemical structure as THC, the active molecule in marijuana. They dock with the same receptor sites in the brain. So you're giving yourself a great big slug of THC, but you aren't just getting marijuana when you meditate. You're getting a big slug of cocaine and heroin as well, because they work on the dopaminergic reward system, and they drive up dopamine in the brain. And in meditators, dopamine can rise as much as 65%. So here you have this massive surge of dopamine in your brain, like you were getting a dose of cocaine or heroin, except you're doing it purely generated by your brain's internal function. So it's your own neurotransmitters and hormones. You're getting anandamide, you're getting dopamine and serotonin, oxytocin. People feel so much love. When you tune into the universe, tune into your higher power, tune into the great masters, these sources of unconditional love, you feel just how much the universe loves you. You are held in infinite, unconditional love. You can be the worst person in the world, and that universe just loves you unconditionally, no matter what you've done, no matter how many mistakes you've made. There's a source of unconditional love. And that produces surges of oxytocin, the love hormone, the bonding hormone. And you're bonding, you're feeling all this love. I mean, read Rumi, read St. Catherine, read St. Teresa of Avila. They're talking about these, Hildegard of Bingen talks about this fire of God's love penetrating her whole body. And it's just lit, a flame of light. Now she's celibate. I mean, she's not even having sex, but she's writing it about it in sexual terms because it's such a powerful experience of love that she's having, and the mystics get that. And so they're having these surges of oxytocin that produces, in turn, that produces nitric oxide and produces several other neurotransmitters, beta endorphins. And so you're feeling absolutely fantastic. And so I have a chapter of Bliss Brain. In my book, I cover all of these drugs, how you can get them from the outside, and how you can generate them purely through meditation in a safe dose. So taking the stuff from the outside, I tried a few drugs, and honestly, I'm not going to go there again because, they feel weird. They have side effects. They aren't quite the right dose. They aren't quite the same as your neurotransmitters. It's okay if you need them, but it's much better to generate all of these internally. And that's what you do in that bliss brain state. And you start to hit these ecstatic states, ananda, over and over and over again. After a while, when you're becoming that radiant being, again, it's spreading outside of your body, outside of your experience to the world around you. So there are all of these things. And that starts to shift your mental health. Maybe you were anxious. Maybe you were depressed. Maybe you did have these issues. After a while, you're going to start to lose them. Now, we also recommend you do EFT tapping as well as meditation, because if you have trauma, buried childhood trauma, especially childhood trauma, and you start going for peak states, then what happens is you're likely to have a dark night of the soul experience. And when we first began building our short path to oneness non-duality course, we made it a requirement that everybody going into that course, before they get to do the very first module of the course, they have to work with a therapist on trauma clearing. And they have to clear that, because if they don't do that, they're going to start to hit these elevated states, and the chances are they're going to have a dark night of the soul. If they've cleared trauma and then they hit elevated states, they are unlikely to have a dark night of the soul experience. So trauma clearing goes along with this, and you can't meditate your way out of trauma. You have to feel it, you have to experience it, and then you have to release it through some kind of body-based therapy. And EFT is a really simple one. There are a lot of other great therapies. EMDR is very, very similar. A lot of therapists use both EMDR and EFT. So use one of these evidence-based therapies to clear trauma, and then you hit these elevated states, and you don't have that dark night of the soul.
I think that is so beautiful. So, Dr. Dawson Church, for our last, I'm just like sitting here in bliss. For our last question, for someone aspiring to integrate spirituality and science in their personal journey, what piece of advice would you offer to guide them on their path?
Use evidence-based methods. When I left home at 15 years old and joined a spiritual community and learned to meditate, they said, here's how you meditate. Here's a cushion, sit there, close your eyes, and still your mind.
I'm having a moment.
I can sit on the cushion and close my eyes. Hardly anyone can still their mind. And so there are all these well-meaning meditation methods, but are they science-based? In Bliss Brain, I scrutinize the meditation methods through the lens of neuroscience. And I say, there's MRI research to support this, 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 and this. Do the stuff that's evidence-based, because if you don't, like I tried to meditate when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I never could get very far with the close your eyes and still your mind instructions because the mind is not easily stilled. And I've been meditating now for over 50 years, and I still can't easily still my mind. It still tends to wander, and you just bring it back again each time. So you want to use an evidence-based technique like eco meditation and use that science-based technique. Don't just go try figure it out. So go whatever you're aiming to do in your life, whatever your goals are, go see what the science says, and it's going to show you the quickest path there. There is so much well-intentioned advice out there. There's well-intentioned coaching, there's well-intentioned therapy, and there's a lot of just advice that is not science-based and is not effective. And in meditation, it's particularly right. There are all of these meditation schools, they'll make these claims. Read the studies. Is that shown in research? Do they have, go onto PubMed, the US government database of research. Go on Google Scholar and find the research, use some of the evidence-based. Although in my book, Bliss Brain, I read the 400 studies for you, and I give you the synopsis in a chapter there. So that'll get you there quickly. One of the people who read the chapter and began to use eco meditation said, Dawson, before I read the chapter and began to use that method, my meditation practice was like wandering around a dark city at night where all the streetlights are out, trying to find my destination. Once I understood the science, I then had a different experience. It was like all the lights were on, I can see all the street signs, I go straight there. And once I went straight there one time, I knew where to go again. Now I go straight there in every single meditation session. So that's why it's so powerful to use that science-based technique. You go straight there and you repeat that every single day. It just makes it way easier.
That is amazing. So for anyone that's listening, I will make sure to link all of Dr. Dawson's websites, his books, everything. And he has so much information on his website. It is tremendous. Dr. Church, I want to thank you so much for coming on Spiritual Spotlight series. You have been such an amazing person to speak with, and I'm truly grateful. Thank you so much.
Rachel, what a joy, and thanks for sharing. And as we are leaving here, I'm just going to encourage everyone,
of course,
just download those links that Rachel gives you and commit just to 30 days of meditation. All I'm asking you for is 30 days, 15 minutes every morning. Just do that one single thing. There are a lot of things you can do. We have practitioners who are certified in trauma clearing on our website. We have all kinds of other resources. We have books, we have online courses. If you're going to do one thing, just make that 30-day meditation commitment, and you'll see your life start to change. So thanks for sharing. It's been wonderful to connect today.